If you paid $1 a meter to go from here to the sun and back, you would still be left with the profits of United Healthcare in any given year. You're probably operating under the assumption that insurance companies want to save money because they've carved out that ground for themselves, and that is a giant lie. The annual revenue of United Healthcare is on the order of over $400 billion a year. If you paid $1 a meter to go from here to Saturn, it would be the equivalent of the annual revenue of every pharmacy benefit manager in 2012. That is the equivalent of 10 Hubble space telescopes at about $10 billion each. These are interstellar scales of money they're making. They do not want to make less money, they want to make more money. There's a lawsuit right now about this against JP Morgan and its board of directors. There is a fiduciary question as to whether it's smart to let the pharmacy benefit manager, the pharmacy, and the health plan all be on the same side of the table negotiating with themselves in cahoots with the pharma company who can come to market with $1 million a year drug.
I don't think we need a new breakthrough. I think we just need the ones that exist to be more mainstream. After a lot of false starts, now all of a sudden, the stuff that we thought was a good idea as a couple, now other people are saying, yes, that's a good idea.
If you're any two doctors who work closely together, that can be hard. If you're married, it can be even harder.
We ended up solving for that, not by getting divorced, but by...
Did you feel like there's one rule that you guys had to set where you could separate work and life?
That's a scam and not possible. But in a business, somebody's got to make a decision. You can have all the opinions you want, but somebody's name goes on the line.
Most of us in psychiatry are like, ooh, it's a really good technology. Look at these studies. Look at these effect sizes. This is really good. Hey, person in my office, do you want this? Oh, no, I think I just like a pill. So there's a mismatch, and these things need to get aligned if we're able to scale this.
Everything comes at a cost, and not all ideas are good or scalable or worth doing. My best advice to anybody who's thinking of doing this is...
Welcome to the MedStory Podcast, where we explore the untold stories behind medicine, business, and innovation. In this episode, we're joined by two incredible guests, Dr. Owen Muir and Dr. Carlene MacMillan. Not only are they both leading experts in interventional psychiatry, but they're also a powerhouse married couple navigating the world of entrepreneurship together. From the challenges of running a business as partners to the path of becoming a chief medical officer, we dive deep into their journey, sharing hard-earned lessons on leadership, scaling a company, and the realities of balancing marriage and medicine. Whether you're a physician looking to transition into business or just curious about the intersection of healthcare and entrepreneurship, this episode is packed with insights you won't want to miss. Let's dive in.
What's been your biggest disagreement as a couple running a business, and how did you resolve it?
I think our biggest disagreement was probably back when we were both just co-founders of our first practice, and like who would actually make the final decision. So there was a time in which he bought a TMS machine, a big fancy piece of equipment, without me knowing, probably a little sooner than I would have. And so we kind of kept having those type of disagreements. And so then ultimately we made it so that I was the CEO, even though we were both founders, because we just, otherwise that kind of thing would kind of keep happening.
Gotcha. Okay. And what about you, Owen? What's your take on that?
I think similarly, there were times when, the business strategy would be quite a bit different. Mm-hmm. And the need to kind of execute on something would require, a bunch of decisions that you just got to make. I think we got better at making decisions together over time. But one of the things that we've settled on is ideally don't be each other's boss. And our current setup is very much, we have a boss who's not either one of us who gets to make a call. But in a business, somebody's got to make a decision. Just like you have an attending of record who makes the final call on the patient, like the attending for the patient makes the call. You can have all the opinions you want, but somebody's name goes on the line of any given decision. And if you're any two doctors who work closely together, that can be hard. If you're married, it can be even harder.
I can only imagine, because I've heard there's been times, and I don't know if you guys have heard of it, where couples start a business together and then it actually ends up tearing them apart because of the stress and it's so challenging. So you're laughing, Carlene. Why?
I'm laughing. No, because I mean, I think that in our first business, so we had a practice that we ended up selling. And I think, towards the end there, it was pretty rough. Owen had sort of started his own thing because, he didn't like my management style. He thought I should have let go people sooner, blah, blah, blah. And it was really tense there. And so we ended up like solving for that, not by getting divorced, but by getting like totally different jobs. So for 3.5 years, I worked at a health tech company. I was the chief medical officer. And, that was the electronic health record we actually used in our practice. But my whole like work life was pretty different from his. And he went more into like med device industry and stuff because it was like too hard to run a business together without it also becoming like something we talked about all the time. But now we have a situation where there's a quad, there's 4 founders, 2 of which are me and Owen, and the other 2 are folks that have known each other for a very long time as well. And I feel like that is the best of both worlds because we're not each other's boss. We have other voices in the room, but we're still, in charge in certain ways.
I gotcha. What about this for you, Owen? Did you feel like there's one rule or boundary that you guys had to set where you could separate work and life?
That's a scam and not possible. I think the thing that you do, the most successful thing we did, and we actually got this from a couples therapist, is have time to talk about the things you need to talk about for both work and life in your calendar so it doesn't bump into time and you're supposed to be watching a TV show at night or taking a bath or whatever. Like, scheduled time to talk about logistics is a really good idea for any couple, but particularly if you work in either in the same company or in interlocking kind of roles. Just put that we got to talk about logistics on the calendar, because if not, you're going to talk about it at night. It's going to destroy dinner. It's going to destroy,
our kids hate boring grown-up talk at the dinner table. And I think like in a regular business where you're not with your spouse, you have scheduled one-to-ones with key people. And I think when you're married, you always see each other all the time. But the reality is you need to set that time apart. And, sometimes, we could have a bath or something and talk about work, but we've decided that we're going to do that. And if we say, I don't want to talk about work right now, then we don't.
Okay, I got you. Having that open communication, I imagine, is super important. With that, with your kids, and, Owen was telling me before this is that you guys have twins. They're 9 years old. And you said they don't like the business talk. Was there a time where you guys noticed that you were talking about business quite a bit in front of them and then they vocalized this?
Oh, it's been always that way. It still is that way. We still slip into it. Our daughter is very mindful of digital health, I guess. No phones at the table. She'll even notice if I'm like watching my Apple Watch, so she keeps us on track. She wants to talk about what she wants to talk about. She actually is entrepreneurial and she has her own ideas for an Etsy store, a YouTube channel, all those kinds of things. But those are exciting, talking about claw machines and slime, very exciting. Whatever we're talking about is just incredibly boring to her.
I mean, Owen, do you feel that maybe there is an aspect of them seeing mom and dad running a business that maybe carried over to her being entrepreneurial?
Undoubtedly. That having been said, both of our kids have their own opinions about what could or should be done in a way that's different from ours. So like when we've asked Quinn to chime in and share her opinion on mommy's job, her insights are actually pretty sharp.
She listens. She overhears things, right? And she'll ask the most kind of pointed questions that get at the heart of, oh yeah, maybe I shouldn't be at that job, or maybe we shouldn't do this thing.
That's pretty incredible. I can't imagine what it's like being raised by 2 psychiatrists, because, but I'm sure that the way that you guys communicate is carried over to that. So that's super cool. Do you think, Carlene, of course, there's been the challenges where it's put like a ton of strain on the relationship, but you guys have found ways through it. But what have been some of the most rewarding parts of it?
I mean, I think we're kind of living it right now, I would say, because after a lot of kind of false starts or people not really getting what we were doing, now all of a sudden the stuff that we thought was a good idea as a couple, now other people are saying, yes, that's a good idea. Let's work together. And I think that's that external validation is been, for me at least, the most rewarding. But it took a while. It took a while to get there.
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah. In our pre-call, you're talking like kiss a couple toads along the way, but that's being an entrepreneur.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And so when it finally clicks, it's, where were you 5 years ago? But okay, you're here now. And so we're going to enjoy it at this point.
Part of what's great for me is that it's extremely validating to have all the things I've been saying all along have external validation. And then she does this sigh and it's just,
if he was right, his crazy idea was right, or whatever he said was going to happen has happened. Yep, you're right. And that's in any marriage, that's always a little bit of the tension. But
new idea at all?
The thing that's been, like, I think for any entrepreneur, external validation matters, right? You want to get traction in the market. In any relationship, you have an idea and you need to get external validation of that idea some of the time, especially when it's going to be what you both spend a metric F ton of your time doing as opposed to doing anything else. And so like we could both be at a, payer or drug company or seeing patients all day long or something. Everything comes at a cost. And not all ideas are good or scalable or worth doing. And just like you want to have a good sense with your partner about what are the kinds of places you'd like to go for dinner. And if somebody hates Thai food, okay, but maybe there's a Thai restaurant that everyone says is great and you just got to check out. Similarly, a business is as much of your time or more than a marriage. And so you're getting married at least temporarily to your job. And you want to make sure before you put a ring on it together with that work obligation, it's really worth your time, especially when you care about how you spend your time. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's surprising, but almost relieving to hear you guys talk about it in this way, because what I would have imagined you to say, especially with your guys' background, is to say it's all about the intrinsic motivators. It's about me feeling good and about the purpose. But you guys are keeping it real and being like, listen, we need to see some external validation. Number one, just a proof of concept of the business to make sure that it's something that people actually want, and understand that it's totally normal to want that and to receive it, and then to take that energy and funnel it into a productive way.
Yeah. I mean, you need, like intrinsic motivation doesn't keep the lights on, right? It doesn't, bring other people to work for you. Like you have to have other people kind of believing in you enough to support what you're doing, because you're just never going to be able to, if it's a big enough idea, you can't do it on your own.
Sure. Absolutely. Was there like a moment when you guys kind of realized with your first business, oh, wow, we're actually running like a real company now rather than, startup?
Yeah. I mean, when we started, it kind of accidentally became a big company. I think, most, at least in psychiatry, lots of us are in private practice. You start off just yourself, just solo. In our case, we shared a little office, like a single room. We just didn't use it at the same time. He was in training. I had little kids. At some point, we're like, oh, we should add a therapist. And then we met a therapist. And then we said, oh, we should get a TMS machine, this giant brain magnet. And I think, we had no idea of scaling. That's why the company was called Brooklyn Minds, very local name, which we grew to really dislike, because we're like, wait, we want to do something like national. Like, why did we pick such a local name? It's because we had no idea when we started that we would grow to, almost 80 people, like almost 30 clinicians. Like it became this big thing. I would say when we realized it was a real business was when we got the TMS machine and we had like employees and shifts and workman's comp and, the accountant running like payroll just for us, all of a sudden became something else. And you had other people depending on you. And I think a lot of us that go away from just the sort of, couch-based traditional psychiatry, like you can't do that unless you are like signing up to actually run a, quote unquote real business.
Yeah, I gotcha. What about you, Owen? Would you say that's similar?
I think I got it a little bit later in the process. Like I recognized it was a business. I didn't know what a business was or what the different kinds of businesses were. Like it wasn't
me
clear.
neither. We didn't go to business school.
Yeah.
Might as well now, but not then.
And in retrospect, it was actually a really solid business by venture backable standards. We had 5 million plus a year in revenue. We had, really high CAC to LTV, right? Those metrics were all in place. We didn't have the balance sheet to execute on the thing we wanted to do. And we didn't understand enough to do fundraising. We didn't have the knowledge.
We didn't know the different types of money. We just didn't know anything. We were just two psychiatrists trying to grow a practice, right? And we've come a long way from that and learned a lot. But yeah, we felt like imposters for a long time, I think. At least I did. I felt like I was a CEO in air quotes.
Go ahead.
One of the things that I think helped her get over that, and she's, I think, grown just a tremendous amount as an executive. It's like worth acknowledging. Because when she went to a company that had raised a bunch of money, she saw that, what we were doing was actually very sophisticated. What I did as a CEO at Brooklyn Mines was very sophisticated compared to what I'm seeing in startups just trying to figure it out for the first time. So like my best advice to anybody who's thinking of doing this is do it once and fail, and then do it all over again for real.
Yeah.
Like have a first company that you learn the lessons from in some way, shape, or form. That's better than trying to figure it out in your first company, which is going to be the best. It's hard to do this all at once. Second-time founders, or multiple-time founders, way easier to work.
It's way easier, yeah.
Tell me about the mindset shift that has to happen from me going from a psychiatrist that's just treating one-on-one on the couch to being a business owner.
Mind shift.
For me, it's a little bit about when you're setting your objectives or even thinking of setting objectives. As a psychiatrist, it's actually very straightforward. I want to get my patient well. And maybe I want to make enough money to pay for my life, or maybe I even want to get paid a lot for what I'm doing. And that can matter a lot to you. What you're thinking as a business owner, at least for me, is how can I get this one-on-one thing that's pretty good to be better if it's too many more people? And what's different about that? So you're thinking a lot more about scale and systems, and you have to enjoy that part of it because that makes the rest of it, HR, benefits. I get really jazzed thinking we're going to save X amount of dollars on our re-up, on our benefits for our plan because we designed such a better health plan, which has nothing to do with the care we're delivering to individual patients and has everything to do about supporting our teams internally and having a better balance sheet. And that's really exciting to me. It's also super boring if you don't want to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me too, like now I like the business parts of it, but at first it was just, I was coming from, this really amazing hospital in Boston, McLean Hospital, Psychiatric Hospital, and I trained at Mass General, and like medicine being a team sport. I had these wonderful interdisciplinary teams. I really liked that. I didn't like just being alone all day with patients. That wasn't interesting to me. It was much more interesting to have other people around. So a lot of it just came from that. And also, I really like working on challenging cases and not kind of getting bogged down with, doctors hate like prior authorizations and all that kind of stuff. And so wanting to have other people that I could delegate to so that I could, work at that kind of top of licensure stuff, that just became like a necessity. And so from there, it just practically grew to meet our needs. Now I think we think a bit more as, okay, this is like a business that we're starting and what are we going to do this quarter and all of that. But that's not how it was back then.
Sure, that's fair. I think what it comes down to is, me being an entrepreneur and having to talk with many of them as well, is that as a healthcare provider, your number one goal is always going to be to get the patient better, right? And you're always going to be at a point in your career where you're doing it one-on-one. But I don't know, for me, there was this internal fire to be like, I want to be able to I want to be able to scale the impact.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be able to help, instead of one-on-one, I want to be able to help thousands and millions of people. And I wonder how much of that is like intrinsic built into someone versus trained. Like, what do you guys think on that?
I don't know that it was intrinsically built in for me, to be honest. I think I was thinking more local, more small, because I didn't know any different at the time. I kind of saw what my mentors were doing, which was, they were attendings at these academic hospitals and they had little private practices, little boutique ones. And I kind of just thought that was what success was. I think it was before, you had these massive startups, you had these massive, like WeWork of the world type of growth stories. So that, like, the idea that you would scale things in that way in our field and in medicine at the time was not that way. I think people that are training now, where, like, Mass General has the venture fund and all this, I think there's a different mindset than what I had as a model. I don't know about you, Owen. I mean, Owen always just thinks big. I think if I wasn't married to Owen, I probably would be in Boston doing that exact thing, right? I think he pushed really to be like, oh, 1 is good, 100 is better. That is more his mindset.
Tell me, Owen.
Yeah. I mean, I like patterns and puzzles. Any individual patient is their own self-contained kind of working out, like, why are they having the problems they're having? That same thinking applies really well to systems. And so what cracked the nut for me was actually the training Carlene made me go to, which was around mentalization-based treatment and adaptive mentalization-based integrative treatment, or AMBIT, which is a systems approach to being curious, not just about the patient-physician relationship, but being curious about learning at work, being curious about the team around the worker, being curious about the disintegrated systems and how they interface. And can I imagine the counterparty who's making it so difficult? So, like, why is the prior authorization there in the first place? What sense does it make to the person doing the prior auth, to the business behind it? So I actually think a lot about the minds, the people running the businesses on the other side of the conversation. And that I find tremendously fulfilling. Like, it's psychiatry for systems. And Carlene's the one who brought me to all of that. But that combination of being curious about systems and then using that curiosity to craft strategies and arguments to create change at scale, that got me hooked and I was stuck.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys realize how unique it is to have the dynamic that you guys have? Like, it's not common to see couples do these kind of things.
Yes, I think so. We've
been
tell
told
us this a lot. I think I know a lot of couples actually in mental health that own businesses together that, and that's a common thing, right? The old mom and pop, right? That's literally what we are. I think that when we met at a conference, a child psychiatry conference, was like the niche of the niche. And we realized that we had, like, very Venn diagram. There was enough there, but there was also enough that was different, but it was very specialized. I couldn't think of other people that had these niches kind of coming together. And I think we feel that way now. Like, I couldn't just go out and find, like, another Owen, like another, middle-aged psychiatrist kind of thing and just take him out, right? That wouldn't work. I don't know who it would be. Like, I think you feel similarly, I hope.
Like, we are so stuck together. It is painful because the thing that we want to happen in the world, like,
very aligned,
and fortunately or unfortunately, and mostly fortunately, there isn't another person who could do this other than Carlene with me.
I've had people try. I've had some, risk externally, but never the same.
And part of the problem is we had, like, heaven forbid our marriage were to fall apart, we'd still have to work together because
we're married to interventional psychiatry.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah,
it's very much like we're in a throuple marriage with the field of interventional psychiatry, and it's a partner we care a lot about, but has some problems. It's really, like, we got to go spend time with her.
If we got divorced, I don't know. Yeah, it would be like when you have the exact same friend group. Like, I just don't even know how you divide it up. It just wouldn't make sense. So.
Which device manufacturers are you going to take the lead on the relationship? Give you a sense of, like, how seriously true this is. So Carlene is, she does committee work at a level that I've never seen in anyone ever before or since.
For professional societies.
Right. Her ability to get a room of people at a professional society to come to agreement about something, anything, is unparalleled. And if you need to get a new thing paid for in medicine or paid differently, the American Medical Association CPT editorial board needs to agree. And the professional society needs to agree. And the subspecialty society needs to agree. And the only person I know of who can possibly do all those things is Carlene. And she also happens to be the appointee from all those professional
psychiatry. For psychiatry. Yes, this is accurate. Yeah, I like to look common ground and bring people together for sure. That's what I like to do. I'm just, like, pragmatic, though. It's not like because I want to be that. It's just because I want to solve the problems. And I see that if somebody's blocking it, like we have to figure it out. So that's how
But
I
there's
came
also
into that.
an absurd level of operational security in our household that people do not assume exists, but absolutely does. And I think this is both because we're therapists by training, so I don't know what's going on with her patients if there's not a very good reason for that information to be shared, and vice versa. There are people who I'll meet at a party and they're like, "Oh, your wife's my psychiatrist," and I have no idea.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, there are business interests, and in her role at the American Psychiatric Association, she'll have to meet with a company, and I'll know nothing about it. And people will assume I know something about it, but I really don't, because she can't tell me because there's an NDA in place or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And likewise, I have some dealings with companies where I just can't tell her the thing, but I'll often have to say, look, you got to go talk to Carlene in her role as XYZ, and she doesn't know. She may be my wife, but I'm not telling her because I don't have a contract that says I can do that.
Mm-hmm.
And we're both very scrupulous in that way. And people assume that no married couple acts like that, but we totally do.
The NDA trumps the spousal privilege, I think, legally, right? So that's interesting. And then also, we've had a lot of time where a lot of people will just reach out and be like, oh, can I just pick your brain for 30 minutes? Can we connect? And I think we both generally, we tend to say yes to those if they're people kind of in our field or adjacent to it. And like the number of times people have said to me, oh, you've got to meet this other New York psychiatrist, this Owen Muir. I'm like, oh, he's terrible.
No way.
Yes, that's happened many times. And then because we have different last names intentionally, because otherwise that would be super confusing. Sometimes people don't realize, and we always love the moment when they realize, these mutual professionals, I didn't know you guys were married. And all right. Yes.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, man. But it does sound dynamic because, of course, as a couple, you want to be able to talk about everything. But you understand that we need to set that boundary of these NDAs, like they need to stay NDAs. And I imagine that's really challenging. But
it's
Yeah.
not
you
that
guys somehow figure it
challenging. I think our training as physicians and psychiatrists specifically taught
Patient
us.
confidentiality,
Yeah.
like stuff that. Yeah. I mean, now I think we're more together in ways so that we don't have that happen as much, but it still does happen, right? He might be an advisor for some company in stealth, and I'm doing some of this society work that's private or board work, and it all works out because I think we trust that the other person is like rowing in the same direction, right? I think he doesn't need to know the details of something to know that I'm not going to go completely against the interests that we have to move the field forward. I will go against my personal interest, though. I think that's a tricky thing, right? I will because I see the bigger picture. The short-term personal interest may be one thing, but the longer-term one for our field is different. And I can do that, but it's not easy, and not everyone does that.
Carlene is among the more scrupulous and least griftery people I've ever met.
I can't help it. Oh, that's not fair, or that's not right. People will be like, oh, you need a new CPT code or something. Yeah, but it's just not how it is. These rules are the rules. This is how, I have to kind of keep things in order, or just my brain doesn't function. So
sounds like a good combo. But this actually is a good, because leeway to this other question I wanted to ask you guys is that if you fast forward 10 years, what breakthrough do you kind of hope is existing in the mental health field?
I don't think we need a new breakthrough. I think we just need the ones that exist to be more mainstream. And I think, as easy, I talk about Amazon a lot because you can if you look at my bank account, you'll see we spend a lot of money on Amazon. We do a lot of stuff we buy there. It's super easy to get these things. And I would just like that some of these newer treatments in psychiatry, like TMS, could be as easy to get as ordering something from Amazon, right? We have that with One Medical now for primary care. It's Whole Food, all of these things are getting easier and easier, but healthcare is still very hard, and psychiatry access is still very hard. So it's really painful to know there's really good treatments out there that it's just really hard to get for a wide range of reasons.
How about you, Owen?
I think in 10 years, if there is a bundled in the outpatient setting that works well with a bundled payment in the acute care setting, that works well with a bundled payment in the nursing home setting, and all those things are standardized across commercial and government payers, and there is a new technology add-on payment program equivalent for new things coming to those markets, if there's a smooth go-to-market for both high effect size and complex interventions, not all the money is in the drug. We're in a much better world. And I would love it if that fancy bundled payment included some ability for the physician group to go at risk on doing it better. I want them to have the incentive and skin in the game to get a patient well and keep them well. And if that's there, I think there's so much innovation in great care that gets unlocked that it boggles the mind.
Sure. So what does that look like? Carlene, you mentioned that it would be good to make it accessible for something like a TMS machine. My understanding is that a TMS machine is a pretty big machine, right?
And
you're not shipping that through me. Was. Okay. Tell me more.
Yeah. So as of like a month ago or so, there's this device and it's this company called AMPA. And basically, like when I saw this device, it was like when you have a whole room full of big computers back in like the 1960s or whatever, and then you see a laptop or you see like the BlackBerry and then the iPhone. For me, it was like seeing that iPhone. It's a device, it's a TMS machine that does fit like in a briefcase. It's meant to be portable. You can take it with you. It's not meant for like self-use, but it's meant for, a technician to go wherever they need to go to give that treatment to the patient. They don't need a special chair. Actually, it's better just like on a regular couch. So that is a big move towards accessibility and portability. And then there's also a number of neuromodulation devices people can use at home, not as powerful as the big TMS, but to extend the treatment. So I think that we're going to see the same way we used to think, oh, I couldn't have a smartwatch or a phone that did all these things. You're seeing in our field that's coming. It's been slow going, but now all of a sudden you're getting that sense of it changing after several decades of machines being really big.
So I'm thinking of this now. You're saying that it's gotten smaller. And I guess if someone's listening to this first and they're not familiar with a TMS machine, really quickly, can you just explain it to me like I'm a third grader?
Yeah. So it looks like a stack of almost like amps, for music or whatever. And then there's two different kinds. The kind we have, it looks like one of those things when you go to the hair salon in the 50s and they had the dryer with the little like helmet thing. It literally looks like just like a stack of things with that attached, or just like a similar paddle thing. So it's a big, clunky machine. It makes a lot of noise. It sounds like an MRI, uses magnets to cause neurons to fire. And so usually these are in, treatment rooms, private rooms. You need a certain amount of dedicated space. You need technicians to run them. Used to be, for these older machines, harder to train than this newer one. And yeah, it's really been just in this very recent kind of, where we're starting to see technology that's like much smaller than that.
And it has a broad use case, which we talked about because you guys have used it for depression. I've used it myself just to learn what it looks like for stroke recovery. And so, and is there a day where I'm going to be able to order a TMS machine and ever do it to myself within the next 10 years, or we're not quite there yet?
I don't know that it'll be a TMS machine per se. It might be, but I don't know that's going to be necessary. There are a lot of ways to modulate the brain. And some of those, if you think of your wedding day, right? That's a neuromodulatory experience. It feels good because all this sensory input, music, dance, sound, smell, all of that gets into your brain through these established pathways. And TMS is a cheat code to just get directly into those brain circuits without having to use all that fancy sensory input. But there are other ways to do that. And so one of them is stimulating the nerves on your head. And you can either do just the trigeminal nerve by having a thing that sticks on your forehead and you sleep with it on, like the Monarch ETNS device, or it could be something that not only stimulates the forehead, but also the occipital nerves, which actually come out through the brachial plexus and kind of run back up to the back of the head. And that's the Relivion device that Neuraleaf, where I'm the chief medical officer, makes for acute migraine, and our forthcoming ProLive RX product, which is a brain stimulator across both trigeminal and occipital nerve inputs for depression. There's a ton of fancy math. You just put it on your head. It's a thing that you put on your head. It comes to your home and you put it on your head and you wear it for 45 minutes twice a day over 8 weeks, and your depression is in remission 30% of the time. That's awesome. And there's no drug there.
Wow. Do I need to be on a call with a psychiatrist while I'm doing these?
No.
Certain ones, I mean, the stronger ones, like the AMPA one I mentioned, the idea is that a technician is there with you, and then there's a video connection, to a psychiatrist for parts of it. But no, a lot of these are, pretty easy. Same way you don't, when you get pregnant, you go to ultrasound, the OB/GYN is not in the office for the ultrasound, right? There's a technician. It's the same idea. It's the same idea here. So my technicians are way better at TMS than you don't want me doing it. I'm not, working my brain, not my hands. Yeah.
If you think in rheumatology, for example, they've perfected these auto injectors so that people can give themselves a shot of a medicine at home. That's what we're talking about. Some things can use an auto injector. Some things still need to be an infusion drug in the clinic. And similarly with brain stimulation, some things are going to be home deployable. Some things are going to have to be in the clinic, and some things may be in both. So the ProLive RX device has a label going through the FDA breakthrough process for both in-clinic deployment and at home, depending on the use case.
Yeah. But we're a far cry from, just general, like even when I trained in psychiatry, general psychiatry, was generally prescribing pills and doing therapy. We're really moving into a different area here with this. Wow. Very exciting. Into a different area.
What's the biggest challenge to actually getting there?
Very exciting. Technology, we have the technology. It's, getting pharmaceutical companies, they have, the big ones, they have a lot of money and they put a lot of money into drug development and advertising and all those kinds of things. The device world that we're in is not like that, right? You have scrappy companies raising money, but they're not able to have these massive budgets. And if the payment models don't work for them, if the CPT codes and the insurance companies aren't quite right, you could have the best technology in the world, and it's not going to scale. So I would say that's the biggest thing. There's the technology, the ops side, all of those logistics, but really at the end of the day, these things live or die based on whether or not payers will pay for them.
What does that process look like to get a payer to understand the value of it and say, yes, I'm going to reimburse it?
Mm-hmm. I mean, so I'd be curious to hear kind of Owen's take, but with pills, there's the FDA approval process. And, it'd be pretty unusual if a drug got FDA approval and jumped through all those hoops. Yeah, a payer may say you need to try some other things first, but they're going to cover it. It's going to be part of their formulary at some point. But with devices, these devices, they get cleared instead of approved, and the bar is not as high. And, in some ways, yeah, that's good. Maybe they can get through faster, but the payers know this. And so they know just because something is FDA cleared doesn't mean that the evidence bar, when it gets cleared, is enough for them to pay for it. So once you have this clearance, you then need to do all kinds of what we call post-marketing studies. You then need to give it to patients who can pay for it, collect all that data, which is a whole thing in and of itself, and then publish on it, and then convince the payers that there's a growing body of evidence. It's a little chicken and egg, right? Them to say that they'll cover it. You also can find champions at payers that, really believe in it, particularly local payers, or, we've cultivated certain relationships where you show them the value and all of that. But it's very challenging. And I think that a lot of device manufacturers, and even like in the psychedelic world, like I would not underestimate how challenging it is to get, payers to embrace newer things like this in mental health. It's how to do it for surgery and other specialties, but mental health has been like the same for so long that anything new that comes along, it just doesn't like fit their playbook. They have completely different like business lines looking at this. And they have behavioral health. Like, I hate that term, behavioral. The same type of people that are approving new surgical techniques. That's what our field looks like now. And there's just like a ways to go to get people to accept that, like sometimes when you credential for insurance, it'll say, are you a physician, a non-physician, or, mental health or psychiatrist? We have our own category or something. There's not a parity. We get lumped together with, and there's nothing wrong with psychologists, social workers, but we're physicians. Like, why aren't we claimed as physicians in the credentialing? We're not. And the technology isn't treated the same. So that to me is the biggest issue. I know when you have strong feelings about that and things like deep brain stimulation.
My hunch is we would do well to learn from the lessons of the past. And those very specific lessons, honestly, are those that Arthur Sackler figured out. So Arthur Sackler was the scion of the Sackler family, and he's the only one whose name isn't getting scraped off of buildings. But he was a psychiatrist. And he was a psychiatrist who worked his way through medical school at a medical advertising firm, writing ad copy. And that was his job when he was a medical student. Then he went to work as the director of research at Creedmoor because he thought the optics of that were good. And he's the person responsible for most medical advertising in America. Prior to having an FDA, drug companies would make a drug, send it to doctors, and tell them, tell us what this does.
And then, it works for Mother's Little Helper.
But they literally just sent Adderall to doctors to figure out what it might be good for. And it seems bonkers to us now, but that was in the, up through the 1960s. This is it's relatively recent. What Arthur Sackler did and others followed up on is figured out how to be a good salesperson to doctors, which is talking about stuff doctors care about. So if you think of even the name, SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, that's really great if what you're trying to do is sell the idea that being a psychopharmacologist is a job. Because before that, psychiatrists did therapy and that was it. And so you needed to convince them that prescribing drugs was something you should do if you have drugs to sell. And that meant talking about things that doctors care about, which is mechanism of action. How does it work? Well, selective for the 5-HT2A receptor. Now, it turns out if you actually go in and do an animal knockout model many years later of Prozac, and you take out the existence of the 5-HT2A receptor, it still works as a drug. So that can't be the mechanism of action. However, the branding of selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, selective norepinephrine, that sounds good to doctors. And I can think about myself as being careful and being selective and choosing something which may or may not actually have to do with the underlying science over time, but it's appealing to physicians who have to do a thing. Physicians want to think about their patients and science, and we need to give them both of those things and pay them for their time appropriately. And if you get all those things aligned, you're going to win. Here's the thing that's healing, that's going to be something you can feel good about, that you can explain to a patient with some science, that's safe and effective according to now having a regulatory agency and is paid for. That's a lot of work to do, but that's the work that we have ahead of us.
But I think it's a big thing to talk about, though, when we're talking about these devices, is if you think of what this SSRI example is a good one, listening to Prozac was a very famous book, right? Prozac was on the cover of Newsweek and Time and all of that. So there was also this cultural phenomenon about taking these pills that, pop culture also absorbed and liked. In the past several years, we've seen about psychedelics, right? MDMA, all of these kinds of psilocybin, all of that in the popular culture, very attractive, right? People like that. You see it on New York Times. It's the Michael Pollan book. It's like hot, right? But then in our field, in psychiatry, a lot of psychiatrists are skeptical. You have a mismatch because they're saying like, oh, no, I don't know about that. That's a bit wild for us, and so you don't have them aligned, but it's in the direction of pop culture liking them. And then with neuromodulation, with the devices, you have the opposite problem where most of us in psychiatry are like, ooh, it's a really good technology. Look at these studies. Look at these effect sizes. This is really good. Hey, person in my office, do you want this giant brain helmet thing? Oh, no, I think I just like a pill. Thank you. I'm not ready for that. So there's a mismatch, and these things need to get aligned if we're able to scale this, because it's weird to people. They feel it's extreme. They think of the cuckoo's nest and ECT, and that's not what we're talking about. But unfortunately, that's, decades of that type of imagery we have working against us as well. Yeah. Oh, yes. I mean, it's much faster. So I think when we think of these rapid acting treatments, we are thinking of some of the psychedelic medications that are going through the approval process, as well as I think with TMS, it used to be that the course was once a day for 36 days. So you can't go every day. So it's going to take like 2 months. That's kind of slow. That's sort of similar to antidepressants, taking a pill. But we now have these accelerated protocols where you can do anywhere from 2 to 20 per day, depending on the protocol. And you can get results in a matter of just a few days that used to take, several months. So it is really quite rapid. But again, the payers are stuck in the daily mindset. We were able to, through advocacy, get it earlier in last July, where now payers will pay for 2 per day instead of 1 per day. But like we as a field are at like 10 to 20 per day, right? There's a real lag and patients don't want to come in all these days. So we have to get those understandings aligned as well so that it can be super rapid.
So my first question is, it's effective, but does it last? Right? And let's start there. So yes, you can get to the job, but how do you maintain it?
First off, does one pill of Prozac last? Does dialysis last? No, it doesn't. And with dialysis, what we figured out is if you want people to not die of kidney failure, you give them dialysis regularly. Now, we have much better durability with these treatments. For example, transcranial magnetic stimulation for OCD, and this is a paper that I'm a co-author on, has durability to 1.93 years.
Pretty good.
Yeah. And that's from a single course of treatment. Different patients are going to have different durability for these things because they have different illnesses underneath, essentially, or different in important respects. So I think it's crucial to dial in durability and get it right, but also it's crucial to not withhold wildly effective and safe retreatment of a condition just because it's in your brain when we would never in a million years do that if it was your kidneys.
Sure. Yeah. But now, and this is funny talking to you guys because I'm starting to put all the pieces together of we're talking about how do we scale this and then how do we make it that it can get beyond just coming into the clinic. But it sounds like in our current day, it may be more effective, it may be faster, but it's not cheaper.
Yeah. It depends what you mean by cheaper and for whom, because you're probably operating under the assumption that insurance companies want to save money because they've carved out that ground for themselves. And that is a giant lie or falsehood, right? So the annual revenue of United Healthcare is on the order of over $400 billion a year. If you paid $1 a meter to go from here to the sun and back, you would still be left with the profits of United Healthcare in any given year. If you paid $1 a meter to go from here to Saturn, it would be the equivalent of the annual revenue of every pharmacy benefit manager in 2012. That is the equivalent of the entire Challenger space program, the whole shuttle program in 2023 adjusted dollars, $199 billion, the entire Apollo space program at $109 billion, and 10 Hubble space telescopes at about $10 billion each. These are interstellar scales of money they're making. They do not want to make less money. They want to make more money. And the way they do that right now is because drugs can be infinitely expensive. They have become vertically integrated pharmacies and pharmacy benefit managers. They get paid some of the money from those drugs to the plan. And there's a lawsuit right now about this against JP Morgan and its board of directors, so this is hot stuff. There is a fiduciary question as to whether it's smart to let the pharmacy benefit manager, the pharmacy, and the health plan all be on the same side of the table negotiating with themselves in cahoots with the pharma company who can come to market with $1 million a year drug. It is completely insane, but wildly expensive to do that. The place in which it is more expensive to do brain stimulation is on the budget line that doesn't include the drugs as part of it.
Yeah, like inpatient, right? So if you think of a lot of times what we're dealing with is people that otherwise they're going to the emergency room, they're being psychiatrically admitted, they're going to residential programs, right? They're costing a lot of money for these types of things, as well as the other indirect costs regarding disability, depression being a very common cause of disability and work loss. So if you're an employer, it actually does make sense to cover these treatments because you just want to do what you will get your employee back to work. And that's why we're seeing interest in the benefit space and in self-funded space to pay these things, because you're just like, oh, wait, if we have an employee who is sick, like we would like that, they get TMS if that's what they need, because we think that's going to be more effective than like a 6-week inpatient hospital stay. And it's going to actually be cheaper. So when you look at that, like you can't be like, oh, how much does it cost compared to Prozac or even like Spravato, esketamine, which is very expensive. That's just the wrong kind of question to be asking. It's more, is it impacting other very expensive things that are generally not desirable to payers and systems?
And there are systems that looked at this many years back. So there's a study called the Cutlass trial in the UK the cost utility of the latest antipsychotics study. And what they found was it didn't matter what the drugs cost, because when someone hits the hospital, that's when you have the problem. And so what we're doing is we're not having the whole budget on the same spreadsheet. Like, no doctor even knows what the drugs cost that they're prescribing and to whom. So if you take doctor visit plus $2,000 a month for the augmentation agent that you have to add on top of the inevitably unlikely to get you to remission drug that then causes weight gain, that then gets you on Wegovy, that then gets you tardive dyskinesia, that then gets you on $100,000 a year drugs like Ingrezza or Astudo. And all those things together add up costs over time, whereas you could have done a thing that was highly likely to work rapidly, kept someone out of the ER, kept someone out of the hospital, and kept them off of this cascade of adverse effects over time, which ruins their health and becomes a financial disaster. But you don't accrue all that cost all at once. And so you really have to know something about the person on the other side of the table. So when I'm talking to a Medicaid plan, which has 10.1 months on plan for the average participant, it's a different conversation.
It's very hard to show these like longer term benefits, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So this is again what I think Owen was talking about earlier about this way of systems thinking is, you have to understand that these payers, they're acting rationally based on what they're set to do, right? And if it's to maximize shareholder value, they're going to make certain types of decisions. If it's an employer trying to minimize how much it's costing to give benefits to employees and get them work, it's going to look different. And I think that's kind of, for lack of a better word, it's kind of like boring. It's not like doctors just like, no, we just want to do the right thing by the patient. Yes, we do too. And also, you don't exist in a vacuum, right? We exist in this larger context, and you have to understand where those systems are coming from.
And ironically, I found myself over time kind of more aligned with the individuals working at the payers and their individual incentives, which are like, I need to make my budget work. I need to not get fired. I need to do the right thing for my team and my part of the company. And they, in many cases, don't even understand the rest of the company, because how could you?
They just care about what they're focused on. And so it's really key to understand things.
This is super interesting because I've always had the idea of the only sole payer being the insurance provider. But based on what Owen was saying there is the current model of how insurance works with those three levels all within the same team. That's going to take a good amount of legislative work to break that up, hopefully, eventually. But what you guys are saying is that it may be worth a better investment of our time to go directly to the employers, help them understand these things and how it's actually going to save them money and be better for their employees. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, so I think in the United States, there's 60% of employers are what's called self-funded, right? So they may, the employee may have a card that says Cigna, and they're using the Cigna network, but behind the scenes, that employer is working they developed a plan, and they actually are going to get to decide what kind of things are covered. And so you see this with, like, there's a fertility benefit like Carrot, there's a musculoskeletal benefit. So self-funded employers, they can pick like a package that they think will be of benefit to them, and also sometimes attract talent of things like fertility benefit or, surgeries for transgender individuals. If it's an older crowd, musculoskeletal, and also now mental health. So you see a couple companies that are focusing on like ketamine therapy, and then, some focusing on this whole interventional thing. That is where you can make change much faster, and the incentives feel more like, you want the patient better because if they're not coming to work, and you don't want to cost the employer like a ton of money, like you want it to be cost effective. That makes sense. When you start talking about commercial insurance, regular thing, it really does stop making sense. You have to look at it the way Owen's saying, by who are you speaking to? What is their kind of program in life? And it could be making very little sense on the surface with someone.
Which doesn't mean they're bad or wrong or you shouldn't work with them. You just have to understand which conversation you should have. And if I'm talking to a Medicaid plan director, I'm really focusing on I'm not going to bring them something that takes 2 years to have any savings.
They don't care. The people's moved on. They're not on their line anymore.
And how can it solve a problem for them now? And that might not even be a financial problem. If we're looking at, a hospital system, it may be, look, this drives volume in neurosurgery and cardiothoracic and gets people out of the bed in the cardiac ICU a day faster, so your cardiothoracic surgeons get to do incrementally more surgeries.
You guys both have been CMOs at several companies now at this point, right? And so I guess my first question is, because what I'm realizing, I've talked to so many doctors now, and a lot of them are looking for opportunities outside of just clinical care. First off, why do you think that is? Why do you think doctors are looking for these opportunities outside of medicine?
I mean, I think that a lot of what we've talked about today in terms of the insurance landscape is part of that. Things getting kind of bought up by private equity, like sense of autonomy, I think is definitely harder. And I also think that there's been so much venture money put into healthcare over the past decade that they see these companies cropping up. And I think, at least for me, one of the reasons to do it was because you'd see these companies getting started by people with no healthcare background whatsoever, like kind of that Travis Kalanick Uber mentality. We're just going to move fast and break things in healthcare. And I think as doctors, we're like, hold on, that makes no sense. I could do this better. Like, how do I get a seat at that table? And that's what led me. I worked for, 3.5 years or so as the chief medical officer at an electronic health record company. Now, I've gone through 10 EHRs. Most of us have a very dysfunctional relationship with our EHRs. Lots of disliking, complaining, burnout, pajama time, all that kind of stuff. And, I felt, okay, what? Can I do that better? Can I work on trying to solve that and, understanding why it is the way it is? And so that's what I went to do. And, now I'm the chief product officer at our new venture, because I really believe that if you build the right tools, then you're going to help the clinicians and the patients have a better experience. And so that feels like a good use of my time. And I kind of found it that way. So I think if you have that sort of why, then industry is attractive. Then, I mean, people are like, oh, they think they're going to make a lot of money, or just diversify, can get boring. And so a lot of reasons to do it.
It's really easy to imagine the grass is greener on the other side. Also, there are many more gigs like that. If you get on LinkedIn, you're going to see 100 listings for CMO jobs. And I'm a doctor. I could be a chief something. I mean, previously, we all wanted to be a department chair, right? If you like leadership, you're going to want a leadership gig. And some people want to do that and others don't. And CMO of, some kind of company is now, I think, up there, or even maybe more prestigious with department chair in the minds of our colleagues. And that's great. I was lucky enough to have remarkable mentorship from a colleague, Dr. Fred Ma, who was the CMO at Merck and J and GE in his career, and really learn from him just so much about that role in, traditionally medical device or pharma companies. And I found his mentorship like anything in life. Like, you meet somebody who teaches you the way in your hero's journey. And in many ways, Fred was that for me, because he's such a remarkable character, cares deeply about doing things the right way. And that just appealed to all the things that appeal to me. I love getting it right. And he taught me about the value of those high standards in those settings. And so it felt like it would be a good fit for me to do something like that now that I had a good example. So if you are lucky enough to be interested in this, I'd say find a mentor that can teach you what it's like. Because in a drug company, in a med device company, in a care delivery company, in a payer, in a health tech company, these are all wildly different jobs.
Okay. So Carlene, if a physician's listening to this, how would they get a job as a CMO? What do they need to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think it LinkedIn is definitely a place. It depends on if it's in tech. Like, I know more about, the kind of health tech world. I would say it's being like an early adopter of different types of, products or tools, getting to know the people that are making them. Usually then it leads to some like advisory gigs. Sometimes it's just like unpaid advice where you find, they find that they're meeting with you and they like how you present stuff, become an advisor, become a thought partner. And then that's how I started at my old gig at Osmine, became advisor. Then I became a part-time consultant, and then I was selling my practice and leaving full-time to become CMO. So it just progressed, so you can do it organically like that. I think if you're trying to go into the life sciences, like Owen said, it makes sense to find some other people that are kind of near peers to you, a few years ahead, and ask them how they got into it. And then, put in a good word and kind of start up the ladder in that way.
I write a really helpful newsletter
Yeah.
that people could
Also,
read.
I mean, like I was in the position to leave my CMO role for this new role. And so I was in a position to think who of my friends and colleagues would be good for this, right? And came up with a short list. And the person that took the job is a, great colleague of ours that I felt this was somebody who was running a chain of interventional practices and was looking to make a change and had kind of the right set of skills. So for him, this is his first job at a tech company, but he had a leadership role somewhere else. And that was the same with me. Like I was, had leadership roles elsewhere, and you just say, okay, this translates.
Wow. Okay. Oh, and I do want to hear about that, about the articles that you write, or you said it's a newsletter. I'm not sure you said, we're going to talk about it at the end. I want to hear about it. But before we get to that, how does a CMO get paid? Like, is it salary, equity? Is it performance-based? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the stage of the company and the startup land. The earlier stage of the company, it might be more in kind of equity and then, than actual cash. But for the most part, you're getting paid, a salary. It's not really usually performance based, I think, unless maybe in some life sciences companies and stuff. But for the most part, you're just a salary kind of thing. And hopefully there's benefits and all those good things. And then I will say, at least in psychiatry, that most of the folks that I know who are CMOs at these startups, they also still all see patients to some degree. Like they usually have their own private practice where they're still seeing few. Maybe it's just on a half day or something like that. But you want to kind of keep muscle still fresh, and it informs your work. Same with, I remember department chairs, right? The department chairs would also have that same like clinic half day. So I think it's really important to know that even though you're moving pretty far away from direct patient care as the main thing you do, still like don't lose it completely. I think, I would be very hard pressed to fully give it up, even though I've cut way down. There's a part of me that still needs to do that. And I think it's like feed each other kind of thing.
Sure. And then how about this, Owen? Like, what's something about, you've been a CMO now, a couple of companies, what's something that no one told you about before you took the role that kind of surprised you?
There is a real value to having a personal brand. And had I known that, I would have done more writing and more media and more podcasting earlier. I would have maybe written somewhat different things earlier. But the power, I mean, I have a very strange platform with the Frontier Psychiatrist newsletter and podcast, where like actual people who make decisions on billions of dollars in healthcare spending enjoy it. And the ability to have that, spot in people's brains, and they know who I am. I mean, I have readers now that I meet out in the world, and I had no idea. So there are people who have relationships with me and my writing and my podcasting that I don't know, but I get to. And I have some influence already because they've read what I had to say. And if you want a job as a CMO, like maybe start being a LinkedIn influencer now. And then like maybe start being a LinkedIn influencer now.
They think of you.
And then they'll know who you are. And so when they think about who they should hire, you already have this extensive media footprint about all the things you've said over the years. My bosses and my team members, when they read a thing that sticks with them or what have you.
Chief technology officer, chief medical officer. They are outward facing roles where you are kind of expected to have that public presence of some kind. So I agree with what Owen's saying, that it's important to have that as part of your identity if you're really interested in, the bigger companies.
It's also cost you nothing to do now other than your time. And it's worth getting some practice managing external comms before it's, a whole company rides on how well you do that.
Sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then I think a lot of times, because I work with physicians to help them create kind of that kind of stuff. And a lot of times it's like, just start doing it. Just start getting the practice in. Don't be like, it's going to be perfect in the beginning. Like it takes reps.
Yes, absolutely. And I know it's great. There's a podcast like a resident's doing a psychiatry thing. It's like psychiatry boot camp, and it's just some resident who wanted to learn. It's great. And now I'm going to think of that person for, potential opportunities.
For both of you, if someone's listened to this and wants to learn more about each of you and then maybe your guys' new venture as well, Is there a place that they can go?
So I have a podcast. Actually, I still involved with my old gig to some extent. So it's called Psychiatry Tomorrow. It's a podcast about a lot of the things we talked about today. So there's that. Also, LinkedIn and things like that. And then, I think Owen's Frontier Psychiatrist is kind of the front door. He writes about me and our kids too. So I'm kind of there. And sometimes I comment.
So the frontierpsychiatrist.com is both the website and the podcast. I have a book called An Essential Pharmacology on Kindle, on Amazon, stores, and all over LinkedIn, and you can message me about stuff. I'm on this podcast right now. I'm on other people. I did a Star Wars podcast a couple weeks ago. That was a blast. Which is another pro tip. Go on other people's podcasts because they'll be happy about it, and learn how to say things that are interesting or engaging, because if you're looking for a gig where that's useful, have practice before it matters.
And then in terms of what we're doing now with Radial, I'm not sure when this is airing. So we're kind of what's called in stealth to some degree. We'll have a kind of bigger announcement, more online soon. But as I mentioned, I'm the chief product officer, which is not the CMO. I've made it leap into kind of another area of startup life. And I feel that interventional psychiatry is the product. And so at a very broad level, that Radial is really actually making good on a lot of what we talked about today to scale interventional psychiatry. And I think we have the right team behind that in our founding team.
Oh my gosh, I am so excited. I'm so excited to see as you guys come out with, after having this conversation, it's making so much more sense about why we need a solution like this. Hopefully this won't be our only conversation, because I could pick your guys' minds for hours and dive into these. And that's the goal of this podcast, is I want to start tackling the hard stuff. And not only complain about it, but find solutions. And you guys are people looking for solutions. So I so appreciate you. This has been a lot of fun.
Likewise. Yeah.
Thank you much.
You've been listening to the MedStory Podcast, where we dive deep into the stories that shape medicine and healthcare. If you found this episode insightful, be sure to follow, rate, and review. Your support helps us bring more valuable conversations to the forefront. This has been a MedStory Studios production, where storytelling meets medicine. Until next time, stay informed, stay inspired, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible in healthcare.